then you may not be aware of what's going on. I quite wisely spilled water on my computer a couple days ago, actually yesterday, and that didn't work out well. So watering your computer to make them grow turns out not the best way to do it. So I'm going to urge against it. If you have been considering that, then I would suggest you consider not considering that. Fortunately, the computer came back up. Everything was working. And unfortunately, I was unable to boot up Windows. So the disks were, the hard drives were good, but it would no longer recognize them as boot disks. So I was unable to do that, and I had to reinstall my entire operating system, which is a pretty big job. If anyone out there has ever done that, you recognize that there's a lot entailed in installing a complete operating system. Mine is fairly complex. I would say quite a bit more complex than average because I am set up as a recording system. So I have, the multiple hard drives for different things, and even just getting all of my information back on there, onto all my hard drives, getting all the samples and my recordings and all that back onto my hard drive. It takes a lot of time. So basically my computer is up and running, but it is not anywhere near ready to do an actual show with, which is unfortunate. One of the big things is OBS, which stands for Open Broadcast Software. That's the software I'm running through to get to my performances, to get my performances out to you guys. That one I had not backed up. I am very organized digitally. I'm very organized in general. If you were looking at my desk right now, there's so many computer parts on it, it would not appear so. Well, that's because I've been redoing my whole system. But I didn't have a backup of OBS. Fortunately, it's very well organized, so I knew everything that needed to go into it, but it's just hours and hours of putting stuff back together. See, Osu Gamer is in on Twitch. Welcome. So, because I spilled water on my computer and had to redo the entire thing, I'm not going to be doing an actual show today. I'm not even really set up to do like a composition stream. So what I'm going to do today is something that I had considered a while back, and this is special thanks to Miskatonic Blue, who often joins us in Twitch and sometimes YouTube, is also on our Discord. She said she had considered doing some live streams of just her sitting and reading books. And I was like, that's a cool idea. And then I also kind of have to give a shout out to Susan, who said, you should read Sherlock Holmes books. And I was like, yes, I should. I've been a massive Sherlock Holmes fan for years. There are 9 books by Arthur Conan Doyle, the original Sherlock Holmes author. They're all great. I've probably read all 9 of those books at least a dozen times. I'm such a fan. And I really like the recent Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock. Even though I really like Basil Rathbone, who played Sherlock in the 60s, I want to say, British actor, he was great. I gotta say, Benedict nails it. He is the best Sherlock that we've had to date. Really good stuff. So today I'm going to read one of the Sherlock Holmes short stories. And if you happen to be a fan of the Sherlock Holmes series, you may recognize some of the parts of this because they lean very heavily on this story for one of those episodes. Osu Gamer says, I heard my college may be getting a music course, so I might audition if the computing course doesn't get any better. Cool. Any recommendations on what kind of pieces I should play for a piano audition? For a piano audition, unfortunately, I'm probably not the best person to make suggestions because I'm so very distinctly not well versed in piano repertoire, unfortunately. I would suggest maybe calling around to a few local private piano teachers, and maybe even go take a private piano lesson or two, specifically just to help prep for that specific concept. Hey, I'm trying to get into this particular course. These are the course requirements. Do you have any suggestions? And if you can afford to do that, I know some music teachers are very uptight about taking lessons from other people. It's almost like they feel like they're being cheated on or something. And I'm not like that. I tell my students, hey, you should go out, you should take lessons from other people, you should be, if you meet musicians, talk to them, hey, what tips do you got? Hey, I noticed you doing this on your guitar. What can you tell me about that? Because no one teacher can give you a well-rounded enough purview to really understand what's going on with this kind of stuff. There's so much to it. And that's why I, to this day, still take lessons myself. I've been playing guitar for around 38 years. I've released 66 rock albums, 65 of them completely solo. I've learned a lot, but there is still so much that I can still learn. And that, I think, is such an important thing. So yeah, getting a few different opinions on how to approach it for your particular level, that kind of personal insight I think would be a really good move, and it would probably just be a really interesting experience for you nonetheless. So great question. So today, story time. We're going to read some Sherlock Holmes, and I will stop periodically and glance at my chat windows and answer questions, but I'm going to kind of concentrate on the story for large chunks of time. Hidden One Blade is in. We just saw Hidden One Blade over on the Discord. Thanks for coming in. We're just about to get started with the actual story. Osu Gamer says, any idea how to pick out a teacher and what a reasonable price is? The price is going to be dependent on your area. Now, I personally do a pay what you can process for all of my students. So I allow my students to decide how much they're going to pay me. And I have students, most of my students pay me around $35 an hour is kind of the average. I have some students who are very well off. I've got, some students who are like high-priced attorneys, engineers who pay $50 or $60 a lesson. I've got some students who are totally struggling and they pay, $15 or $20 a lesson. But it's going to depend on whether they're doing hour lessons. Hour lessons obviously are going to cost a bit more, and just on that teacher's popularity and what they kind of think. So there's, I would call around. As far as picking out the right teacher, really what I said, take lessons from multiple people and see kind of who gels with you personally. I always want people to know, if I feel like I'm the wrong personality for you, maybe I'm a little too energetic and you're just more laid back, by all means, go check out some different guitar teachers, because I'd rather have you learn what you want than just to be stuck with me. That's kind of a big one there. So yes, good questions. Love it. All right, like I said, I'm going to start reading here. I've never done this on stream before, so this is a little experimental for me. But this is A Scandal in Bohemia from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter the first. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer. They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil from men's motives and actions, but for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Grit in a sensitive instrument, or a crack in one of his own high-power lenses would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet, there was but one woman to him, And that woman was the late Irene Adler, of dubious and questionable memory. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness and the home-centered interest which rise up around a man who finds himself master of his own establishment were insufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every form of society with his whole bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street. Buried amongst his old books and alternating from week to week between cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug and the fierce energy of his own keen nature, he was still, as ever, deeply attracted by the study of crime and occupied his immense faculties and extraordinary powers of observation in following out those clues, clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time, I heard some vague account of his doings, of his summons to Odessa in the case of the Trepoff murder, of his clearing up the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers at Trincomalee, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of his activity, however, which I merely shared with all the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a journey to a patient, for I had now returned to civil practice. When my way led me through Baker Street, as I passed the well-remembered door, which must always be associated in my mind with my wooing and with the dark incidents of the study in scarlet, I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again, to know he was employing his extraordinary powers. His rooms were brilliantly lit, and even as I looked up, I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in a dark silhouette against the blind. He was pacing the room swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest, his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told their own story. He was at work again. He had risen out of his drug-created dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own. His manner was not effusive. It seldom was, but he was glad, I think, to see me. With hardly a word spoken, but with a kindly eye, he waved me to an armchair, threw across his case of cigars, and indicated a spirit case of gazagine in the corner. It's a new word to me. I'm going to have to look up gazagine. Then he stood before the fire and looked me over in his singular introspective fashion. "Wedlock suits you," he remarked. "I think, Watson, that you have put on 7.5 pounds since I saw you." "7," I answered. "Indeed, I should have thought a little more. Just a trifle more, I fancy, Watson. And in practice again, I observe. You did not tell me that you intended to go into harness." "Then how do you know?" "I see it. I deduce it. How do I know that you have been getting yourself very wet lately, and that you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl?" "My dear Holmes," said I, "this is too much. You would certainly have been burned had you lived a few centuries ago. It is true that I had a country walk on Thursday and came home a dreadful mess, but as I have changed my clothes, I can't imagine how you deduce it. As to Mary Jane, she is incorrigible, and my wife has given her notice, but there, again, I fail to see how you work it out." He chuckled to himself and rubbed his long, nervous hands together. "It is simplicity itself. My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the leather is scored by 6 almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped round the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud from it. Hence, you see, my double deduction that you have been out in vile weather, and that you had a particularly malignant boot-splitting specimen of the London slavey. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my room smelling of iodoform, with a black mark of nitrate of silver upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat to show where he has secreted his stethoscope, I must be dull indeed, if I do not pronounce him an active member of the medical profession." I could not help laughing at the ease with which he explained his process of deduction. "When I hear you give your reasons," I remarked, "the thing always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple that I could easily do it myself, though at each successive instance of your reasoning I am baffled until you explain your process, and yet I believe that my eyes are as good as yours." "Quite so," he answered, lighting a cigarette, and throwing himself down into an armchair. "You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead from the hall to this room." "Frequently." "How often?" Well, some hundreds of times. Then how many are there? How many? I don't know. Quite so. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. By the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to chronicle one or two of my trifling experiences, you may be interested in this. He threw over a sheet of thick, pink-tinted notepaper, which had been lying open upon the table. It came by the last post, he said. Read it out loud. There was The note was undated and without either signature or address. There will call upon you tonight at 7:45, it said, a gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of very deepest moment. Your recent services to one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one who may safely be trusted with matters which are of an importance which can hardly be exaggerated. This account of you we have from all quarters received. Be in your chamber then at that hour, and do not take amiss if your visitor wear a mask. This is indeed a mystery, I remarked. What do you imagine it means? I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts. But the note itself, what do you deduce from it? I carefully examined the writing, and the paper upon which it was written. The man who wrote it was presumably well-to-do, I remarked, endeavoring to imitate my companion's processes. Such paper cannot be bought under half a crown a packet. It is particularly strong and stiff. Peculiar, that is the very word, said Holmes. It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light. I did so, and saw a large E with a small g, a P, and a large G with a small t woven into the texture of the paper. What do you make of that? Said Holmes. The name of the maker, no doubt, or his monogram, rather. Not at all. The G with the small t stands for Gesellschaft, which is German for company. It is a company contraction much like our CO. P, of course, stands for papier. Now, the EG, let us glance at our Continental Gazetteer. He took down a heavy brown volume from his shelves. Eglinitz, here we are. Egria, it is a German-speaking country in Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad. Remarkable as being the scene of the death of Wallenstein for its numerous glass factories and paper mills. Ha ha, my boy, what do you make of that? His eyes sparkled, and he sent up a great blue triumphant cloud from his cigarette. The paper was made in Bohemia, I said. Precisely, and the man who wrote the note is a German. Do you note the particular construction of the sentence? This account of you we have from all quarters received. A Frenchman or Russian could not have written that. It is the German who is so uncourteous to his verbs. It only remains, therefore, to discover what is wanted by this German who writes upon Bohemian paper and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. And here he comes, if I am not mistaken, to resolve all of our doubts. As he spoke, there was the sharp sound of horses' hooves and grating wheels against the curb, followed by a sharp pull at the bell. Holmes whistled. A pair by the sound, said he. Yes, he continued, glancing out of the window. A nice little brougham and a pair of beauties. 150 guineas apiece. There is money in this case, Watson, if there is nothing else. I think that I had better go, Holmes. Not a bit, Doctor. Stay where you are. I am lost without my Boswell, and this promises to be interesting. It would be a pity to miss it. But your client, never mind him. I may want your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Sit down in that armchair, Doctor, and give us your best attention. A slow and heavy step, which had been heard upon the stairs in the passage, paused immediately outside the door. Then there was a loud and authoritative tap. Come in, said Holmes. A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6 feet 6 inches in height, with the chest and limbs of a Hercules. His dress was rich, with a richness which would, in England, be looked upon akin to bad taste. Heavy bands of astrakhan were slashed across the sleeves and fronts of his double-breasted coat, while the deep blue cloak which was thrown over his shoulders was lined with flame-colored silk, and secured at the neck with a brooch which consisted of a single flaming barrel. Boots which extended halfway up his calves and which were trimmed at the tops with rich brown fur completed the impression of barbaric opulence which was suggested by his whole appearance. He carried a broad-brimmed hat in his hand, while he wore across the upper part of his face, extending down past the cheekbones, a black vizard mask. Not sure if I pronounced that word right. Vizard? which he apparently adjusted that very moment, for his hand was still raised to it as he entered. From the lower part of the face, he appeared to be a man of strong character, with a thick hanging lip, a long straight chin suggestive of resolution pushed to the length of obstinacy. "You had my note?" he asked with a deep, harsh voice and a strongly marked German accent. "I told you I would call." He looked from one to the other as if uncertain who to address. "Pray, take a seat," said Holmes. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address?" "You may address me as the Count von Kramm, a Bohemian nobleman. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and discretion, whom I may trust with a matter of the most extreme importance. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone." I rose to go, but Holmes caught me by the wrist and pushed me back into my chair. "It is both or none," said he. "You may say before this gentleman anything which you may say to me." The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. "Then I must begin," said he, "by binding you both to absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of that time, the matter will be of no importance. At present, it is not too much to say that it is of such a weight that it may have influence upon European history." "I promise," said Holmes. "And I." "You will excuse this mask," continued our strange visitor. "The august person who employs me wishes his agent to be unknown to you, and I may confess at once that the title by which I have just called you is not exactly my own." "I was aware of it," said Holmes dryly. "The circumstances are of great delicacy. Every precaution has to be taken to quench what might grow to be an immense scandal and seriously compromise one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter implicates the great house of Ormstein, hereditary kings of Bohemia." "I was also aware of that," murmured Holmes, settling himself down into his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor glanced with some apparent surprise at the languid, lounging figure of the man who had been no doubt depicted to him as the most incisive reasoner and most energetic agent in Europe. Holmes slowly reopened his eyes and looked impatiently at his gigantic client. "If your Majesty would condescend to state your case," he remarked, "I should be better able to advise you." The man sprang from his chair and paced up and down the room in uncontrollable agitation. Then, with a gesture of with a gesture of desperation, he tore the mask from his face, hurled it upon the ground. "You are right," he cried. "I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it?" "Why indeed?" murmured Holmes. "Your Majesty had not spoken before I was aware that I was addressing Wilhelm Gottschalk Sigismund von Ormstein, Grand Duke of Cassel-Felstein, and hereditary king of Bohemia." Ooh, that sentence is a mouthful. That's a big old mouthful there. Okay. Pardon. So make sure I got all my chats up here. All right. See how we keep doing. Okay. Our visitor glanced with some apparent surprise. Oh no, I was already at that. Bohemia. Okay, here we go. Back on track. "But you can understand," said our strange visitor, sitting down once more and passing his hand over his high white forehead, "you can understand that I am not accustomed to doing such business in my own person. Yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have come incognito from Prague for the purpose of consulting you." "Then pray, consult," said Holmes, shutting his eyes once more. The facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, I made the acquaintance of the well-known adventuress Irene Adler. The name is no doubt familiar to you. "Kindly look her up in my index, Doctor," murmured Holmes without opening his eyes. For many years, he had adopted a system of docketing all paragraphs concerning men and things so that it was difficult to name a subject or a person on which he could not at once furnish information. In this case, I found her biography sandwiched in between that of a Hebrew rabbi and that of a staff commander who had written a monograph upon the deep-sea fishes. "Let us see," said Holmes. Born in New Jersey in the year 1858, contralto. La Scala. Prima donna, Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes. Retired from operatic stage. Living in London. Quite so. Your Majesty, as I understand, became entangled with this young person, wrote her some compromising letter, and is now desirous of getting those letters back. Precisely so. But how? Was there a secret marriage? None. No legal papers or certificates? None. Then I fail to follow, Your Majesty. If this young person should produce her letters for blackmailing other purposes, how is she to prove their authenticity? There is the writing. Forgery. My private note paper. Stolen. My own seal. Imitated. My photograph. Bought. We were both into photograph. Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed an indiscretion. I was mad. Insane. You have compromised yourself seriously. I was only crowned prince then. I was young. I am but 30 now. It must be recovered. We have tried and failed. Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought. She will not sell. She will not sell. Stolen then. 5 attempts have been made. Twice burglars in my pay ransacked her house. Once we diverted her luggage when she traveled. Twice she has been waylaid. There has been no result. No sign of it? Absolutely none. Holmes laughed. It is a pretty little problem, said he. But a very serious one to me, returned the king reproachfully. Very indeed. And what does she propose to do with the photograph? To ruin me. But how? I am about to be married. So I've heard. To Clotilde Latham von Saxe-Meiningen. They didn't make the names easy in this one, did they? Second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You may know the strict principles of her family. She is herself the very soul of delicacy. A shadow of doubt as to my conduct would bring the matter to an end. And Irene Adler threatens to send them the photograph, and she will do it. I know that she will do it. You do not know her, but she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women, and the mind of the most resolute men. Rather than I should marry another woman, there are no lengths to which she would not go. None. You are sure that she has not sent it yet? I am sure. And why? Because she has said that she would send it on the day when the betrothal was publicly proclaimed. That will be next Monday. Then we have 3 days yet, said Holmes with a yawn. That is very fortunate, as I have 1 or 2 matters of importance to look into just at present. Your Majesty will, of course, stay in London for the present. Certainly, you will find me at the Langham under the name Count von Crom. Then I shall drop you a line to know how we progress. Pray do so. I shall be all anxiety. Then as to money, you have carte blanche? Absolutely. I tell you that I would give you the provinces of my kingdom to have that photograph. And for present expenses, the king took a heavy chamois leather bag from under his cloak and laid it on the table. There are 300 pounds in gold and 700 in notes, he said. Holmes scribbled a receipt upon the sheet of his notebook and handed it to him. And mademoiselle's address? He is Briney Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. Holmes took a note of it. One other question, said he. Was the photograph a cabinet? It was. Then, good night, Your Majesty, and trust that we shall soon have some good news for you. And good night, Watson, he added, as the wheels of the Royal Brougham rolled down the streets. If you will be good enough to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I would like to chat this little matter over with you. End of chapter 1. I'm kind of curious as to how time's going to flow like this. I'm not sure how long these things will take. So I'm also going to apologize for clearing my throat so much. My mother and I both have this thing where we will just like drinking some water and we'll just choke on it. And then we just can't clear our throats for like an hour and a half. If I could just learn to enjoy choking, it would be an awesome thing to have going on. All right, what do we got here? Some comments here from Osu Gamer, who's looking at the possibility of taking some piano lessons. Course requirements say 2 contrasting pieces and 1 original if you have one. Don't like how it doesn't say how good you have to actually be. Yeah, and that's it's good to know what they're actually trying to attract when you're going after any kind of music lessons on a kind of an official scale like that. What level of piano player are you? Are you kind of beginner, intermediate, advanced? Because I could write a piece for you. You know, I don't know how long it needs to be. If it's like, one little 2-minute piece I could write. something for you to play. Even though I don't play piano well myself, I do compose for it quite a lot. That could be kind of fun. So anyway, if you happen to, excuse me, still be on, let me know what you think. All right. I think I'm ready to go. And again, for those who may be coming in a little late, we are reading A Scandal in Bohemia from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, written by Arthur Conan Doyle. Let's get back on track here. Chapter the second. At 3 o'clock precisely, I was at Baker Street, but Holmes had not yet returned. The landlady informed me that he had left the house shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. I sat down beside the fire, however, with the intention of awaiting him, however long he might be. I was already deeply interested in his inquiry, for though it was surrounded by none of the grim and strange features which were associated with the 2 crimes which I had already recorded, still the nature of the case and the exalted station of his client gave it a character of its own. Indeed, apart from the nature of the investigation which my friend had on hand, there was something in his masterly grasp of a situation and his keen, incisive reasoning, which made it a pleasure to me to study his system of work and to follow the quick, subtle methods by which he disentangled the most inextricable mysteries. So accustomed was I to his invariable success that the very possibility of his failing had ceased to enter my mind. It was close upon 4 before the door opened, and a drunken-looking groom, ill-kempt and wide-whiskered, with an inflamed face and disreputable clothes, walked into the room. Accustomed as I was to my friend's amazing powers in the use of disguises, I had to look 3 times before I was certain that it was indeed he. With a nod, he vanished into the bedroom. Once he emerged in 5 minutes, tweed suited and respectable as of old. Putting his hands into his pockets, he stretched out his legs in front of the fire and laughed heartily for some minutes. "Well, really," he cried, and then he choked and laughed again until he was obliged to lie back, limp and helpless, in a chair. "What is it?" "It's quite too funny. I am sure you can never guess how I employed my morning, or what I ended by doing." "I can't imagine. I suppose you have been watching the habits and perhaps the house of Miss Irene Adler." "Quite so, but the sequel was rather unusual. I will tell you, however, I left the house a little after 8 o'clock this morning in the character of a groom out of work. There is a wonderful sympathy of Freemasonry among horsey men, but be one of them, and you will know all there is to know. I soon found Briony Lodge. It is a bayou villa with a garden at the back, but built out in front right up on the road, 2 stories. Chubb must be a style of lock. Chubb locked to the door. Large sitting room on the right side, well furnished, with long windows almost to the floor and those preposterous English window fasteners which a child could open. Behind there was nothing remarkable, save the passage window could be reached from the top of the coach house. I walked round it and examined it closely from every point of view, but without noting anything of interest. I then lounged down the street and found, as I expected, there was a mews in a lane which runs down by the wall of the garden. I lent the ostlers a hand by rubbing it down their horses, and received in exchange 2 pence, a glass of half and half, 2 fills of shag tobacco, and as much information as I could desire about Miss Adler, to say nothing of 6 other people in the neighborhood in whom I was not in the least interested, but whose biographies I was compelled to listen to. "And what of Irene Adler?" I asked. "Oh, she has turned all the men's heads down in that part. She is the daintiest thing under a bonnet on this planet, so say the Serpentine Mews to a man. She lives quietly, sings at concerts, drives out at 5 every day, and returns at 7 sharp for dinner. Seldom goes out at other times, except when she sings, has only 1 male visitor, but a good deal of him. He is dark, handsome, and dashing. He never calls less than once a day, and often twice. He is a Mr. Godfrey Norton of the Inner Temple. See the advantages of a cabman as a confidant." I said that. See the advantages of a cabman as a confidant? They had driven him home 12 times from the Serpentine Mews and knew all about him. When I had listened to all he had to tell, I began to walk up and down near Briony Lodge once more and to think over my plan of campaign. This Godfrey Norton was This Godfrey Norton was evidently an important factor in the matter. He was a lawyer. That sounded ominous. What was the relation between them, and what was the object of his repeated visits? Was she his client, his friend, or his mistress? If the former, she had probably transferred the photograph to his keeping. If the latter, it was less likely. On the issue of this question depended whether I should continue my work at Briony Lodge or turn my attention to the gentlemen's chambers in the temple. It was a delicate point, and it widened the field of my inquiry. I feel that I bore you with these details, but I have to let you see my difficulties if you are to understand the situation. I am following you closely, I answered. I was still balancing the matter in my own mind when a hansom cab drove up to Briony Lodge. A gentleman sprang out. He was a remarkably handsome man, dark, aquiline, and mustached. Evidently the man of whom I had heard. He appeared to be in a great hurry, shouted to the cabman to wait, and brushed past the maid, who opened the door with the air of a man who was thoroughly at home. He was in the house about half an hour, and I could catch glimpses of him in the windows of the sitting room, pacing up and down, talking excitedly and waving his arms. Of her I could see nothing. Presently he emerged, looking even more flurried than before. As he stepped up to the cab, he pulled a gold watch from his pocket and looked at it earnestly. "Drive like the devil," he shouted. "First to Gross and Hankey's in Regent Street, and then to the Church of St. Monica in Edgware Road. Half a guinea if you do it in 20 minutes. Away they went, and I was just wondering whether or not I would do well to follow them, when up the lane came a neat little landau. The coachman with his coat only half buttoned and his tie under his ear, while all the tags of his harness were sticking out of the buckles. It hadn't pulled up before she shot out of the hall door and into it. I only caught a glimpse of her at the moment, but she was a lovely woman with a face that a man might die for. "The Church of St. Monica, John, and half a sovereign if you reach it in 20 minutes. This was quite too good to lose, Watson. I was just balancing whether I should run for it or whether I should perch behind her landau when a cab came through the street. The driver looked twice at such a shabby fare, but I jumped in before he could object. "The Church of St. Monica, and half a sovereign if you reach it in 20 minutes. It was 25 minutes to 12, and of course it was clear enough what was in the wind. My cabby drove fast. I don't think I ever drove faster, but the others were there before us. The cab and the landau with their steaming horses were in front of the door when I arrived. I paid the man and hurried into the church. There was not a soul there to save the two whom I had followed and a surpliced clergyman who seemed to be expostulating with them. They were all three standing in a knot in front of the altar. I lounged up the side aisle like any other idler who has dropped into a church. Suddenly, to my surprise, the three at the altar faced round to me, and Godfrey Norton came running as hard as he could toward me. "Thank God," he cried. "You'll do. Come, come." "What then?" I asked. "Come, man, come. Only 3 minutes or it won't be legal." I was half dragged up to the altar, and before I knew where I was, I found myself mumbling responses which were whispered into my ear, and vouching for things of which I knew nothing. Generally assisting in the securing of tying up of Irene Adler, spinster, to Godfrey Norton, bachelor. It was all done in an instant. And there was the gentleman thanking me on one side and the lady on the other, while the clergyman beamed on in front of me. It was the most preposterous position in which I have ever found myself in my life. It was the thought of it that started me laughing just now. It seemed that there had been some informality about their license, that if the clergyman absolutely refused to marry them without a witness of some sort, and that my lucky appearance saved the bridegroom from having to sally out into the streets in search of a best man. The bride gave me a sovereign, and I mean to wear it on my watch chain in memory of the occasion. "This is a very unexpected turn of affairs," said I. "And then what?" "Well, I found my plans very seriously menaced. It looked as if the pair might take an immediate departure and so necessitate very prompt and energetic measures on my part. At the church door, however, they separated, he driving back to the temple and she to her own house. I shall drive out to the park at 5 as usual," she said as she left him. I heard no more. They drove away in different directions, and I went off to make my own arrangements. "Which are?" "Some cold beef and a glass of beer," he answered, ringing the bell. "I have been too busy to think of food, and I am likely to be busier still this evening. By the way, Doctor, I shall want your cooperation." I shall be delighted. You don't mind breaking the law? Not in the least. Nor running a chance of arrest? Not in a good cause? Oh, the cause is excellent. Then I'm your man. I was sure that I might rely on you. But what is it that you wish? When Miss Turner brought up the tray, when Mrs. Turner has brought up the tray, I will make it clear to you. Now, he said as he turned hungrily to the simple fare that our landlady had provided. I must discuss it while I eat, for I have not much time. It is nearly 5 now. In 2 hours we must be on the scene of action. Miss Irene, or Madam rather, returns from her drive at 7. We must be at Bryan Lodge to meet her. And what then? You must leave that to me. I have already arranged what is to occur. There is only one point on which I must insist. You must not interfere, come what may, you understand? I am to be neutral. Do nothing whatever. There will probably be some small unpleasantness. Do not join in it. It will end in my being conveyed into the house. 4 or 5 minutes afterward, the sitting room window will be open. You are to station yourself close to that open window. Yes? You are to watch for me, for I will be visible to you. Yes? And when I raise my hand, so, you will throw into the room what I give you to throw, and will, at the same time, raise the cry of fire. Do you quite follow me? Entirely. It is nothing very formidable, he said, taking that. When you raise the cry of fire, it will be taken up by quite a number of people. You may then walk to the end of the street, and I will rejoin you in 10 minutes. I hope that I have made myself clear. I am to remain neutral, to get near the window, to watch you, and at the signal throw in this object, then to raise the cry of fire, and to wait for you at the corner of the street. Precisely. Then you may entirely rely upon me. That is excellent. I think, perhaps, it is almost time that I prepare for a new role I have to play. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned in a few minutes in the character of an amiable and simple-minded nonconformist clergyman. His broad black hat, his baggy trousers, his white tie, his sympathetic smile, and general look of peering and benevolent curiosity were such as Mr. John Hare alone could have equaled. It was not merely that Holmes changed his costume, his expression, his manner, his very soul seemed to vary with every fresh part that he assumed. The stage lost a fine actor, even as science lost an acute reasoner when he became a specialist in crime. It was 6:15 when he left Baker Street, and still 10 minutes to the hour when we found ourselves in Serpentine Avenue. It was already dusk, and the lamps were to be lighted, and the lamps were just being lighted as we paced up and down in front of Bryan Lodge, waiting for the coming of its occupant. The house was just such that I had pictured it from Sherlock Holmes' succinct description. But the locality appeared to be less private than I expected. On the contrary, hey, that's the title of one of my albums. But I digress. On the contrary, for a small street in a quiet neighborhood, it was remarkably animated. There was a group of shabbily dressed men smoking and laughing in a corner, a scissors grinder with his wheel, 2 guardsmen who were flirting with a nurse girl, and several well-dressed young men who were lounging up and down with cigars in their mouths. You see, remarked Holmes as we paced to and fro in front of the house, this marriage rather simplifies matters. The photograph becomes a double-edged weapon now. The chances are that she would be as averse to it being seen by Mr. Godfrey Norton as our client is to it coming to the eyes of his princess. Now the question is, where are we to find the photograph? Where indeed? It is most unlikely that she carries it about with her. It is cabinet size, too large for easy concealment about a woman's dress. She knows that the king is capable of having her waylaid and searched. 2 attempts of the sort have already been made. We may take it, then, that she does not carry it about with her. Where, then? Her banker or her lawyer? There is the double possibility, but I am inclined to think neither. Women are naturally secretive, and they like to do their own secreting. Why should she hand it over to anyone else? She could trust her own guardianship, but she could not tell what indirect or political influence might be brought to bear upon a businessman. Besides, remember that she had resolved to use it within a few days. It must now be where she can lay her hands upon it. It must be in her own house. But it has twice been burgled. Psh! They did not know where to look. But how will you look? I will not look. What then? I will get her to show me. But she will refuse. She will not be able to. But I hear the rumble of wheels. It is her carriage. Now, carry out my orders to the letter. As he spoke, As he spoke, the gleam of the sidelights of a carriage came around the curve of the avenue. It was a smart little landau which rattled up to the door of Bryan Lodge. It had pulled up. One of the loafing men at the corner dashed forward to open the door in the hope of earning a copper, but was elbowed out of the way by another loafer who had rushed up with the same intention. A fierce quarrel broke out, which was increased by the two guardsmen, who took sides with one of the loungers, and by the scissors grinder, who was equally hot upon the other side. A blow was struck, and in an instant, the lady, who was stepped from her carriage, was the center of a little knot of flushed and struggling men who struck savagely at each other with their fists and sticks. Holmes dashed into the crowd to protect the lady, but just as he reached her, he gave a cry and dropped to the ground, with the blood running freely down his face. At his fall, the guardsmen took to their heels in one direction and the loungers in the other, while a number of better-dressed people, who had watched the scuffle without taking part in it, crowded in to help the lady and to attend to the injured man. Irene Adler, as I will still call her, had hurried up the steps, but she stood at the top step with her superb figure outlined against the lights of the hall, looking back into the street. "Is the poor gentleman much hurt?" she asked. "He is dead," cried several voices. No, there's life in him, shouted another, "but he'll be gone before you can get him to the hospital." "He's a brave fellow," said a woman. "They might have had the lady's purse and watch if it hadn't been for him. They were a gang, and a rough one too. Ah, he's breathing now. He can't lie in the street. May we bring him in, ma'am?" "Surely, bring him into the sitting room. There is a comfortable sofa. This way, please." Slowly he was borne into Briony Lodge and laid out in the principal room. While I still observed the proceedings from the post by the window, the lamps had been lit, but the blinds had not been drawn, so that I could see Holmes as he lay upon the couch. I do not know whether he was seized with compunction at that moment for the part he was playing, but I know that I never felt more heartily ashamed of myself in my life than when I saw the beautiful creature against whom I was conspiring, or the grace and kindliness with which she waited upon the injured man. Yet it would be the blackest treachery to Holmes to draw back now from the part which he had entrusted to me. I hardened my heart. I took the smoke rocket from under my ulster. After all, I thought, we are not injuring her. We are but preventing her from injuring another. Holmes had sat up upon the couch, and I saw him motion like a man who is in need of air. A maid rushed across and threw open the window. At the same instant, I saw him raise his hand, and at the signal, I tossed my rocket into the room with a cry of fire. The word was no sooner out of my mouth than the whole crowd of spectators, well-dressed and ill, gentlemen ostlers and servant maids, joined in a general shriek of fire. Thick clouds of smoke curled around the room and out of the open window. I caught a glimpse of rushing figures, and a moment later the voice of Holmes from within, assuring them that it was a false alarm. Slipping through the shouting crowd, I made my way to the corner of the street, and in 10 minutes was rejoiced to find my friend's arm in mine, and to get away from the scene of the uproar. He walked swiftly and in silence for some few minutes until he had turned down one of the quiet streets which led towards Edgware Road. "You did very nicely, Doctor," he remarked. "Nothing could have been better. It is all right. You have the photograph?" "I know where it is." "And how did you find out?" "She showed me, as I told you." "I'm still in the dark. I do not wish to make it a mystery," said he, laughing. "The matter was perfectly simple. You, of course, saw that everyone in the street was an accomplice. They were all engaged for the evening. I guessed as much. Then, when the row broke out, I had a little moist red paint in the palm of my hand, rushed forward, fell down, clapped my hand to my face, and became a piteous spectacle. It is an old trick. That I also could fathom. And they carried me in. She was bound to have me in. What else could she do? And into her sitting room, which was the very room I suspected. It lay between that and her bedroom, and I was determined to see which. They laid me on the couch. I motioned for air. They were compelled to open the window, and you had your chance. How did that help you? It was all important. When a woman thinks that her house is on fire, her instinct is to rush at once to the thing which she values most. It is a perfectly overpowering impulse, and I have more than once taken advantage of it. In the case of Darlington's substitution scandal, it was of use to me, and also in the Arnsworth Castle business. A married woman grabs at her baby, an unmarried one reaches for her jewel box. Now it was clear to me that Our Lady of today had nothing in the house more precious to her than what we were in quest of. She would rush to secure it. The alarm of fire was admirably done. The smoke and shouting were enough to shake the nerves of steel. She responded beautifully. The photograph was in a recess behind a sliding panel just above the right bell pull. She was there in an instant, and I caught a glimpse of it as she half drew it out. When I cried out that it was a false alarm, she replaced it, glanced at the rocket, rushed from the room, and I have not seen her since. I rose and, making my excuses, escaped from the house. I hesitated whether to attempt to secure the photograph at once, but the coachman had come in, and he was watching me narrowly. As he was watching me narrowly, it seemed safer to wait. A little over-precipitance may ruin all. And now, I asked, our quest is practically finished. I shall call with the king tomorrow, and with you, if you come with us, we'll be shown into the sitting room to wait for the lady. But it is probable that when she comes, she may find neither us nor the photograph. It may be a satisfaction to His Majesty to regain it with his own hands. And when will you call? At 8 in the morning. She will not be up, so that we shall have a clear field. Besides, we must be prompt, for this marriage may mean a complete change in her life and habits. I must wire to the king without delay. We had reached Baker Street and stopped at the door. He was searching his pockets for the key when someone passing said, "Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." There were several people on the pavement at the time, but the greeting appeared to come from a slim youth in an ulster who had hurried by. "I have heard that voice before," said Holmes, staring down the dimly lit street. "Now I wonder who the deuce that could have been." End of chapter 2. Not much left. We're toward the end of this here. One short chapter left. If any of you have not read the Sherlock Holmes books before, there were 9 books. 4 of them were novels, and the other 5 were collections of short stories. And when I was looking through, I've got them all in one Word document. When I was looking through them today to look at, I was first thinking of doing Silver Blaze, which is one about a racehorse, and then I thought of the Bruce Partington plans, and that also has some elements of the Bruce Partington. That made its way into some of the new Sherlock series, and then my eyes landed on Scandal in Bohemia. I was like, "Nah, that's the one right there." I got to tell you though, as I'm reading this, it's kind of sexist. A little bit. Okay, so what have we got in comments over here? Osu says, back to the piano thing, not that good for what I've seen. Most people in this course seem to be beginners. Cool. I'm working on some ABRSM3 pieces. Never done any exams. I just play those pieces to keep track of progress. Okay, see a beginner. The original piece is optional. Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, definitely. With what I'm reading here, I'm definitely thinking that, taking a couple of private lessons to really assess and maybe call around to some piano teachers, find out if they're familiar with this course you're about to try to get into, and maybe they can advise you a little more clearly about what that is. Perhaps they know about the school. They may have helped prep students for it before. So yeah, could be. I'm curious to know how things go. Feel free to jump into the Discord if you're not already a member, and once you take some lessons or whatever, let us know how things are going, because I always like these kinds of stories and see how they pan out. And nonetheless, keep on doing your thing, because making music is awesome. Okay. Whew. Only apply for that course if the state of your current course doesn't change. And that's understandable. And that's, it's really, I am not a college graduate. I have some college credits from the military. Actually, I've got quite a few in language, because I took a 1-year language course in the military. That was a really good duty. It was in Monterey, California. That's where I started running. It was awesome. As military duty went, mine was really good. I had a few exercises out, we did a couple of exercises in Korea in the middle of winter. It gets really cold out there, but if you're like If you listen to YouTube videos of David Goggins, former Navy SEAL, gung ho, that was not the part of the military I was in. We were much less gung ho. we were not very gung, nor were we very ho, in any combination. So, head teacher is awful. 4 staff members have quit because of him. If nothing gets done about him and I get the option to do this course, I'll do. Yeah, and that's so unfortunate. I've been self-employed for 15 years teaching music, and man, but I've done the blue collar thing. I've done the white collar thing. I've been in factories. I've been in organizations, and there's this very uncommon kind of concept of protecting your own. Oh, well, this person's a manager, so the other managers protect. It's like, no, man, once you become a manager, you should be thrown to the freaking wolves. It's like sink or swim, baby. You better be able to handle it. This is why I work for myself. I argued with bosses a lot, and it was so fun. In fact, you guys, I don't know if anyone watching may remember, but about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I was on jury duty out here in Eastern Washington. And when we were doing jury selection, the attorneys for each side are getting up and they're kind of asking general questions of the audience of potential jurors. And Casey Marshall, one of the attorneys, gets up and he says, "What is brutal honesty?" And everyone is just kind of quiet. And then I said, "Would that be like saying that I don't like the way you tied your tie?" And everyone was like, all the board people, you could hear like heads like snapping in my direction. Like, did that really just happen? And this guy looks at me, he's like, he says, yeah, that's a good example. Can I ask what I did wrong? And I said, well, you went with an asymmetrical knot, and I've never cared for that. And then, of course, when the next attorney gets up, he comes over to me, he's like, okay, how we looking? I know we're going to have to do this. And I'm like, looking good. So after the whole case was over, and I think it lasted for like 4 or 5 days, it was a pretty interesting case. As interesting as something can be about a water main. But afterward, this attorney, he pulled me, and his side lost, which I knew they were going to as soon as we started the case. It was, I thought, fairly obvious. But so we talked for a while, and he said, what were you guys' thoughts? Because once the case is over, we can talk to anybody about anything, and as we so choose. And so we're talking about it, and I said, this is what my thoughts were. This is what the thoughts of the jury were. And it was funny because his assistant, his other attorney, I forget his name, also a very cool guy. I was the jury foreman, and he said that he knew before they'd even selected the jury. As soon as I talked about the tie, he's like, "That's going to be our jury foreman." He knew who the foreman was before we knew who the jury was. So I said, and we were talking for a while. I said, man, let me apologize for the crack about the tie. I said, but here's the thing. I've been self-employed for 15 years, and the only thing that I miss about having a job is messing with my bosses. And you were my stand-in that day. So he got a good laugh out of that, and so it was fun. Nice enough guy, but yeah, they didn't stand a chance of winning that. I've heard that the guy who, it was the plaintiff who filed suit, and that he's hoping to appeal it. And I was like, he doesn't stand a chance. He just doesn't. I've only done jury duty the one time, and fortunately in this case it was fairly interesting. Basically, the idea of the case was a water main had been installed in a town called Lind over here in Eastern, a little town. It's probably got, 400 or 500 people in it. Very, very small town. Similar to the kind of town that I live in. I also live in a very small town like that. So they had laid a new water main along like this one section. And a building owner along that section claimed that it was installed incorrectly and was causing flooding in the basement of his building. But the flooding that was there showed no indication of coming in from the water main or from what they claimed was that the soil had not been properly put back in. So they didn't think the water main was leaking, but rain was leaking into it. And there was just, from what we could see, there was no pond. They were talking about at one point there was 12,000 gallons of water in this basement. And they showed us video of this little thing going drip, drip, drip. I'm like, how long would it take to get 12,000 gallons out of this little dripping water? So it didn't add up at all. Is it hard to find students in small town? Yeah, I don't have any students from my own town, but I do all my teaching online. So funny thing, like most of my students are still over in Western Washington, where I used to teach in person. That's the majority of them. And it's funny, the last student I actually took on, she's really nice. She had called me. She found my phone number in a list of tutors. And she was calling for her son. She wanted just like a general, like a math tutor for math and history, just a general tutor for her teenage son. I said, I'm really sorry. I only teach guitar. And she said, I want to learn how to play guitar. And so I put her on my schedule, and she started like a couple days later. And she's that was like probably 6 months ago. She's doing classical guitar, and she's doing great with it. She just recently bought a new guitar and is really enjoying it. So, yeah, I think that was the most interesting way that I've ever gotten a student. What's a good site for looking for tutors? Oh, gosh, I don't know. You might try Craigslist for your area. Online is a really good choice for getting any kind of tutoring. Like for me in teaching music, one of the nice things about online is that I have a lot of resources in my computer system for music. That's probably obvious to people who watch my music shows. Again. So, if I need something, I can just pull it up. It's like, if someone asked, like I had a bass student a while back ask about Feel Good Inc. by the Gorillaz. Great song. I didn't know how to play it. I don't listen to the Gorillaz a bunch. I like them. But I'm like, I'll pull this up. And there you go. I can find resources online if I don't have them specifically. I've got all kinds of stuff that I don't have to print up stuff anymore. And it's nice too, because I can I used to write things out for students, and now I can just pull up a sheet music notation program and punch it in. It looks very professional. I can print that off as a PDF, send them to them in email. They can look at it on their computer. They can print it up if they want. As far as where to find a teacher, that's a tough one. If you want in person, well, really, either Craigslist. You can probably find music teachers on Craigslist. I used to advertise on Craigslist. I don't know if you have Craigslist over there either. I'm not sure. But, you might want to just look for whatever kind of piano playing you're interested in. Particularly if you can do online, just look up, online, jazz piano lessons, or online classical piano lessons, or just online piano lessons. See what you find. And it's great too, because if you are in a small town, or if you're somewhere where you don't know people, you can still take your lessons from anywhere in the world. I took a lesson from Liran Raffaelli, who's a jazz player out in New York. And it was just completely awesome. One of my guitar students one time took a lesson from someone in, I think, London. He was my in-person student, so he did an online lesson over there with a jazz guy. And I was like, dude, let me know how it goes. That's awesome. Gumtree, similar to Craigslist. Okay, I'm not familiar with Gumtree, so yeah, give it a shot. But look that stuff up. And I kind of wish I could advise you better. The only thing I've been meaning to call my friend Stephanie anyway. I don't know if she teaches online. I think she still teaches in person. Yeah, because I really only know 2 piano teachers. I'm pretty sure that Brianne is not teaching anymore. And I don't think that, because I think Stephanie, she's a wonderful pianist and just a really nice gal. I think that most of her students are in person. She is an organist for her church. And so she gets just tons of students from her church. And that's something else. If you are a member of any kind of organization out there, a book club, a church, then you may know some people who teach and you just don't know it. So you could just ask around in person is also not a bad idea. But again, that all depends on kind of where you're at with everything. So some people like me, I'm a member of the Mad Poet Society. There you go. $50 for a 60-minute for a 1-hour lesson. Yeah, that's probably pretty reasonable. Absolutely. Like I said, my general thing, people pay me around $35 an hour, or for a lesson. Lessons are generally a half hour, but I'm not real stringent about 30 minutes, time's up, log off. So I'll say more like half hour to 45 minutes is probably my general lesson time with a lot of people. If I have students, back to back, then I do have to cut out on time, but I try to kind of separate them out. So yeah, that's again. I mean, whether or not it's a good price really depends on you. If you got money, just falling out of your pockets as you walk down the road, then it won't be a problem. Hopefully, you are in a good position like that, or at least a reasonable position. All right, let's get back to Sherlock Holmes here. We got one short chapter left, and then I will yak with you guys some more. Okay. And again, for those who might be coming in a little on the late side, we are doing a very non-standard show for the Mad Poet today. Normally I do music streams, but because so I'm still reinstalling, I've got this much up and running. So we're just doing story time today. We are reading from we are reading from A Scandal in Bohemia, from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. We're going into chapter the 3rd, the final chapter. I slept at Baker Street that night, and we were engaged upon our toasted coffee in the morning when the King of Bohemia rushed into the room. "You've really got it," he cried, grasping Sherlock Holmes by either shoulder and looking eagerly into his face. "Not yet. But you have hopes." "I have hopes." "Then come, I am all impatience to be gone." "We must have a cab." "No, my brougham is waiting." "Then that will simplify matters." We descended and started off once more for Briony Lodge. "Irene Adler is married," remarked Holmes. "Married? When?" "Yesterday." "But to whom?" "To an English lawyer named Norton." "But she could not love him." "I am in hopes that she does." "And why in hopes?" "Because you may spare your majesty and because it would spare your majesty all fear of future annoyance. If the lady loves her husband, she does not love your majesty. If she does not love your majesty, there is no reason why she would interfere with your majesty's plan." "It is true, and yet, well, I wish she had been of my own station. What a queen she would have made." He relapsed into moody silence, which was not broken until we drew up in Serpentine Avenue. The door of Briony Lodge was open, and an elderly woman stood up on the steps. She watched us with a sardonic eye as we stepped from the brougham. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I believe," said she. "I am Mr. Holmes," answered my companion, looking at her with a questioning and rather startled gaze. "Indeed, my mistress told me that you were likely to call. She left this morning with her husband in the 5:15 train from Charing Cross for the Continent." "What?" Sherlock Holmes staggered back with chagrin and surprise. "What do you mean she has left England?" "Never to return." "And the papers?" asked the king hoarsely. "All is lost?" "We shall see." He pushed past the servant and rushed into the drawing room, followed by the king himself. The furniture was scattered about in every direction, with dismantled shelves and open drawers, as if the lady had hurriedly ransacked them before her flight. Holmes rushed at the bell pull. That's a word that I'm not accustomed to using. Bell pull. Tore back the small sliding shutter and, plunging in his hand, pulled out a photograph and a letter. The photograph was of Irene Adler herself in an evening dress. The letter was superscribed to Sherlock Holmes, Esquire, to be left until called for. My friend tore it open, and we all three read it together. It was dated at midnight of the preceding night and ran this way. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you really did it very well. You took me in completely. Until after the alarm of fire, I had not a suspicion. But then, when I found how I had betrayed myself, I began to think. I had been warned against you months ago. I had been told that if the king employed an agent, it would certainly be you. And your address had been given to me. Yet, with all this, you made me reveal what you wanted to know. Even after I became suspicious, I found it hard to think evil of such a dear, kind old clergyman. But, you know, I have been trained as an actress myself. Male costume is nothing new to me. I often take advantage of the freedom which it gives. I sent John, the coachman, to watch you, ran upstairs, got into my walking clothes, as I call them, and came down just as you departed. Well, I followed you to your door, and so made sure I was really an object of interest of the celebrated Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Then I, rather imprudently, wished you good night, and started for the temple to see my husband. We both thought the best resource was flight, when pursued by so formidable an antagonist. So you will find the nest empty when you call tomorrow. As to the photograph, your client may rest in peace. I love and am loved by a better man than he. The king may do what he will without hindrance from one who he has cruelly wronged. I keep it only to safeguard myself and to preserve a weapon which will always secure me from any steps which he might take in the future. I leave a photograph which he might care to possess, and I remain, dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, very truly yours, Irene Norton, née Adler. What a woman! Oh, what a woman! Cried the king of Bohemia, when we all three had read the epistle. Let me say that sentence again. What a woman! Oh, what a woman! Cried the king of Bohemia when we had all three read the epistle. Did I not tell you how quick and resolute she was? Would she not have made an admirable queen? Is it not a pity that she was not on my level? From what I have seen of the lady, she seems to be on a level She seems indeed to be on a very different level to your majesty, said Holmes coldly. I am sorry that I have not been able to bring your majesty's business to a more successful conclusion. On the contrary, my dear sir, cried the king, nothing could be more successful. I know that her word is inviolate. The photograph is now safe as if it were in the fire. I am glad to hear your majesty say so. I am immensely indebted to you. Pray tell me in what way can I reward you? This ring. He slipped an emerald ring from his finger and held it out to the palm of his hand. Your majesty has something which I should value even more highly, said Holmes. You have but to name it. This photograph. The king stared in amazement. Irene's photograph? Certainly, if you wish it. I thank your majesty. Then there is no more to be done in the matter. I have the honor to wish you a very good morning. He bowed and, turning away without observing the hand which the king had stretched out to him, he set off in my company for his chambers. And that was how a great scandal threatened to affect the kingdom of Bohemia, and how the plans of Mr. Sherlock Holmes were beaten by a woman's wit. He used to make merry over the cleverness of women, but I have not heard him do it of late. And when he speaks of Irene Adler, or when he refers to her photograph, it is always under the honorable title of the woman. The end. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of that short story. Thank you very much for listening. That was kind of fun. I'm finding it's a little awkward to read like this because like a little thing popped up that said, oh, there's a new thing on your Discord. And I just, like my little taskbar pops out and it's like, I got to read this story, and I'll see like a message come up over here. So I think in the future I may have to like shut everything else down. I'll probably read again tomorrow because I'm not going to be ready to do a show. Anyway, it was very interesting. I hope you guys had a little fun with that. It's a fun teacher. Okay, yeah, so it looks like you found a few teachers here that give you some possibilities. That is great. Was it a bad spill? Yeah, it was. I don't know how well you can see this. This is 32 ounces, and it was probably about 3/4, probably about 24 ounces. and it went, basically my desk that I'm standing at, my computer is right here underneath it, went over the edge and kind of ran down the back. Fortunately, not much got inside. I dried everything out, and like I said, fortunately, it worked. And here's the thing. Certainly, I don't want to buy a new computer because they're expensive. I have a fairly strong system, so I could afford it, don't really want to. But even more than that, I am not willing to upgrade to Windows 11 until Windows 10 is no longer being supported. That's what I did with Windows 7 to Windows 10. I did not quit using Windows 7 until it was no longer supported. And so I got about a year and a half left, and I don't want to be on Windows 11 until I have absolutely no choice left. Yeah. So yeah, this is great. Again, thank you very much for joining us for Story Time with the Mad Poet. And I will be back tomorrow, possibly reading another chapter, story from Sherlock Holmes, possibly doing a composition stream. I'm almost sure that I'm not going to be ready to do a music show by tomorrow. There's just too much left in my broadcast software and some of the connecting software. Some of my recording software is just not back up yet. But yeah, it's... You started using 7 a year after it stopped being supported. Yeah, I mean, for security reasons, unfortunately, yeah. If I didn't need to be connected to the internet, then I would still be on Windows 7. Absolutely. But I do need to be connected to the internet. So there are some security issues with it. It's the best operating system they've made to date, in my opinion. So anyway, that's it for me. And until next time, I will see you